Respecting the result of the Brexit referendum means not just leaving the European Union, but the single market and customs union as well. That's what Theresa May has always told us. The first phase of the negotiations made clear that this would create a problem on the Irish border. But the Prime Minister has stuck to her red lines and has chosen to kick the can down the road. On Monday, Jeremy Corbyn announced that the Labour Party wants to remain in a customs union with the European Union. I think he's right. A customs union is essential for business and is the only way to resolve the Northern Ireland situation. But I also think, like many of his supporters, that he needs to go further and back remaining in the single market too. If Jeremy Corbyn can make this happen, he'll be doing this country a true service.
So, Karan, we stay in the customs union, we stay in the single market. What the bloody hell was all that about then nearly 2 years ago? What was it about? What did we vote for then? What have we achieved or attained?
For a mistake.
Just selling everyone out.
See, this is the whole problem with Brexit. When people voted to leave, they didn't say on what basis. Many people assumed that they would be staying in the single market. Many people didn't realize the repercussions of all this, and the complications are so huge. Here we are with a situation.
Karen, you've been a bit presumptuous to decide.
Because I've spoken to people who've said this.
Well, I've spoken to people every day.
And the reality is that the Prime Minister has put these red lines down, where these red lines have continually
This is based on you speaking to a few people. Is it?
Single market.
No, he's in the House of Lords.
Prime Minister,
precisely.
Prime Minister's single market, red line and customs union that we're leaving both, we've boxed ourselves into a corner over here, not least in the Northern Ireland situation.
Yes.
I was in Ireland last
Yes.
month, and they're terrified of the situation that there might be a border again. We cannot have a border. The Good Friday Agreement is far too important.
Yeah.
I mean,
we have to preserve it.
I must allow other people in. I would just say that I wouldn't worry. Boris Johnson has clearly got the border issue solved, although it seems to change by hour. But Britain, fortunately, we don't really go in for revolution or revolting on the streets. I do sense, and come on, Karen, you're an astute bloke. The reason Mr. Corbyn is suddenly, who has voted consistently against Europe and anything European, the reason he's suddenly embracing your line is that he sees a vote coming later this year. He wants to hoover up the dissident Tories, hoover up the Scots Nats, anybody else, and what are there, half a dozen Lib Dems or however many there are on a minibus, get the whole lot of them and bring the government down. That's the reality of it.
The Labour position has been evolving, and Jeremy Corbyn himself has admitted that he voted to remain. Now, he could have done much more during the referendum, and if he'd done much more, we wouldn't be in this position.
In December, Karen, he said quite clearly we were going to come out of the customs union, the single market. But let's just talk about that speech. That was one of the most cynical, calculating, treacherous speeches I have ever heard in my life. Here was the neo-Marxist, the lifelong anti-capitalist, suddenly getting into bed with the CBI, the bosses' organisation, the capitalist organisation. Frank Field said it. Labour have ratted on 3/4 of their constituents, and with the hugest respect to you, you sit in a bloated, unelected House that wants to thwart Brexit. And I'm just wondering when your pals in there, when Remainer MPs, and when treacherous Whitehall mandarins who speak out against our negotiating.
Don't hold back, Carol.
Let me finish. Who speak out against our negotiating. What you do is you weaken any chance of a deal that we're going to get. You weaken this country and you weaken this government.
You know something? You've had to go there. You've insulted the House of Lords, which is the guardian of the nation. And
yes, I haven't. Unelected. You're thwarting the will of the people.
Our wonderful civil service that is respected around the world for its objectivity and quality.
Oh, please, really?
Yes.
Well, June, why don't you?
Really? Sir Martin Donnelly, he's well.
I'm coming back to him in a minute. Don't worry, Carol. I got you on that one.
Wow.
First of all, as you know, I'm not a Corbynista, but I think that Corbyn is completely right on this. And same as you, Karen, I don't think he's gone far enough. I think we need the single market as well as the customs union.
Because you don't want Brexit.
No, that's the only way that we safeguard jobs, that we safeguard our economy, that we protect British business, and also that we actually protect the Good Friday Agreement. And then to add to that, actually, Carol, when you look at about whether or not Jeremy Corbyn is being cynical and whether or not this is a calculated move, At the end of the day, 65% of Labour voters are actually pro-EU. So
7 out of 10 constituencies June voted to leave. Stop twisting.
And more than 75% of Labour members actually want a second referendum.
Let's just look at this graphic. Now, here we see that outside of the EU is where the majority of growth is. Trade with the EU is becoming less important. So this is why, exactly, we're becoming less reliant on the EU, which is why we have to take back our ability to trade.
So let's just talk about this graphic we've just seen. First of all, it just talks about exports.
Yes.
If we look at overall trade, we are a net importer as a country. We're a net importer, including from the European Union. Whichever way you look at it, even if our proportion of trade overall with the European Union is declining, it is still 50% of our trade. 10 years down the road, it's going to be more than 40% of our trade. Wait for this. On top of that, nearly 20% of our trade, approaching 20%, is with free trade agreements through the European Union with other countries, including Canada, now Japan.
Yes.
So we have got almost 70% of our trade around the world through a free trade through the European Union and with the European Union.
And you expect
us to give that up and go after the 30%. Let me just finish. It's a really important one. Go after the 30%, which we may never get. The whole of the Commonwealth, which I'd love to do more trade with, is less than 10% of our trade. Countries like India have free trade agreements with only 9 countries.
Commonwealth have had the biggest growth of every bloc
is a Western
over the past
country.
5 years. Karan, you know it.
True free trade deals are not easy. And then here's the other point. Countries that already have free trade agreements with the European Union, like South Korea, have said, you can't just roll over if you leave the European Union and expect us to give the same terms as the European Union. That's 500 million people. You're 65 million people.
Block.
We're going to renegotiate. And I've heard this from the horse's mouth, where India's concerned, the EU-India free trade agreement is far more important to India than a UK-India free trade agreement.
I'm like you, June. I'm not a Corbyn supporter. And responding to something that Carol said earlier about this being a calculated move, isn't all...
It's dirty politics.
Yeah. Isn't all politics calculated moves? Isn't that the purpose of a politician, to calculate the best move to advance the goals of the party? Now, Corbyn, as everyone around this table knows, I really don't like the man. But this decision doesn't go far enough for me either, by the way. But he's demonstrated...
So it doesn't matter who says it, really, does, as long as...
Hold on a minute, Carol. Right? He's demonstrated he's grown half a spine. Now, if he grew the other half...
No, he hasn't. He's trying to be Prime Minister.
Right? If he grew the other half...
And he will. Get ready for it.
Well, this is what I'm about to say, if I can actually say it, right?
Okay.
Right. If he grew the other half of his spine and actually embraced the single market too, somebody that never thought I could ever bring myself to vote Corbyn may actually consider shaking his hand.
But he's not doing it because he believes in it. He's doing it to get...
No, he's doing it what's best for Britain.
He's doing best for
Britain. Last thing I'll say is that little graphic you showed us, it said EU and non-EU. Now, as well as what Karan said, which I endorse wholeheartedly, the other part to that graphic is, it says EU and non-EU. So the non-EU part is the rest of the world, which is tens and tens and tens, if not hundreds of other countries, right? They're not one thing. The non-EU isn't one block, right? So, of course, even if there's a smaller percentage of EU that we're trading with on, what did you say, imports, not exports, not imports, right? Even if that's only 40% and 60% is the rest of the world, the non-EU, that's each individual country we're going to have to negotiate with.
There's the TPP.
No, but that means that, what, 20,
and by the way, no other bloc will give us what we've got here, which is the best single market in the world. Free trade
You know what, Carol,
services and capital. No one else gives it to
Karen, can I interrupt quickly? Because, Carol, you mentioned Sir Martin Donnelly, and I have a little gift for you.
Oh, do you? Right,
in relation to him. Now, earlier this week, his comments were totally spot on. He said leaving the EU, or leaving the single market and the customs union was the equivalent of trading a delicious 3-course meal, and I think there's some European wine in there, for a packet of crisps. Even you don't look happy with that.
And that's verging on treachery.
This is the Mandarin you called a treacherous Mandarin.
I think he
Martin Donnelly, somebody I've actually worked with when he was in the Foreign Office.
He's a high quality,
high caliber,
Karen,
ethical,
he worked in
objective
the EU Commission.
civil servant.
He did not.
Yes, he did.
He was a civil servant.
He worked in the EU Commission.
No, he did not.
He also was Liam Fox's, the Secretary of State for International Trade's permanent secretary.
I say again, he worked in the EU Commission, and he's probably had lots of 3-course dinners courtesy of them.
Inside out, he was actually in the Department of International Trade. Here's somebody saying it was like being a fairy godmother if you think you can get the deal that the Prime Minister wants.
And I am going to interrupt right there.
Dreamland.
Karen, I'm going to stop you right there.